Chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1. Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches stood at the top of a high mountain surrounded by a pine forest. It looked more like a prison than a school, with its gloomy gray walls and turrets. Sometimes you could see their pupils on their broomsticks, flitting like bats above the playground wall, but usually the place was half hidden in mist, so that if you had to glance up at the mountain, you would probably not have noticed that the building was there at all. Everything about the school was dark and shadowy. There were long, narrow corridors and winding staircases, and of course, there were the girls themselves, dressed in black gym slips, black stockings, black hobnailed boots, gray shirts, and black and gray ties. Even their summer dresses were gray and black, checked. The only glimpses of color were the sashes around their gym slips, a different color for each house, and the school badge, which, for a black cat sitting on a yellow moon. For special occasions such as the prize giving or Halloween, there was another uniform consisting of a long robe worn with a tall pointed hat. But at these were black too. It didn't really make much of a change. There were so many rules that you couldn't do anything without being told off, and there seemed to be tests and exams every week. Mildred Hubble was in her first year at the school. She was one of those people who always seemed to be in trouble. She didn't exactly mean to break rules and annoy the teachers, but things just seemed to happen whenever she was around. You could rely on Mildred to have her hat on back to front or her bootlaces trailing along the floor. She couldn't walk from one end of the corridor to the other without someone yelling at her. And nearly every night she was writing lines or being kept in, not that there was anywhere to go if you were allowed to go out. Anyway, she had lots of friends, even if they did keep their distance in the potion laboratory, and her best friend, Maud, stayed loyally by her through everything, however hair raising. They made a funny pair, for Mildred was tall and thin with long plaits, which she often chewed absent mindedly, another thing she was told off about, while Maud was short and tubby, had round glasses, and wore her hair in bunches. On the first day at the academy, each pupil was given a broomstick and taught to ride it, which takes quite a long time and isn't nearly as easy as it looks. Halfway through the first term, they were each presented with a black kitten, which they trained to ride on the broomsticks. The cats weren't for any practical purpose except to keep tradition going. Some schools present owls instead, but it's just a matter of taste. Miss Cackle was a very traditional headmistress who did not believe in any newfangled nonsense and trained her young witches to keep up all the customs that they had been taught in her young day. At the end of the first year, each pupil received a copy of the popular Book of Spells, a 3-inch thick volume bound in black leather. This was not really to be used, as they already had paperback editions for the classroom. But, like the cats, it was another piece of tradition. Apart from early yearly prize giving, there were no presentations until the fifth and final year, when most pupils were awarded the witch's higher certificate. It did not seem likely that Mildred would ever get that far. After only 2 days at the school, she crashed her broomstick into the yard wall, breaking the broomstick in half and bending her hat. She mended the stick with glue and sticky tape, and unfortunately, it still flew, though was an ugly bundle where the ends joined, and sometimes it was rather difficult to control. This story really begins halfway through Mildred's first term, on the night before the presentations of the kittens. It was almost midnight, and the school was in darkness except for one narrow window lit softly in the glow of candle. This was Mildred's room, where she was getting in bed, wearing a pair of black and gray striped pajamas, and dropping off to sleep every few minutes. Maud was curled up at the end of the bed and enveloped in a gray flannel nightdress and black woolen shawl. Every pupil had the same type of room, very simple, with a wardrobe, iron bedstead, table, and chair, and a slit window like the ones used by archers in castles of long ago. There was a picture rail along the bare walls, from which hung a sampler embroidered with a quotation from the Book of Spells, and also during the day several bats, Mildred had 3 bats in her room, little furry ones which were very friendly. She was fond of animals and was looking forward to the next day when she would have a kitten of her own. Everyone was very excited about the presentation, and they had all spent the evening ironing their best robes and pushing the dents out of their best hats. Maud was too excited to sleep, so had sneaked into Mildred's room to talk about it with her friend. "What are you going to call yours, Maud?" asked Mildred sleepily. "Midnight," said Maud. "I think it sounds dramatic." "I'm worried about the whole thing," Mildred confessed, chewing on the end of her plate. "I'm sure I'll do something dreadful, like treading on its tail, or else it'll take one look at me and leap out the window. Something's bound to go wrong." "Don't be silly," said Maud. "You know you have a way with animals. And as for treading on its tail, it won't even be on the floor. Miss Cackle hands it to you, and that's all there is to it. So there's nothing to worry about, is there?" Before Mildred had time to reply, the door crashed open to reveal their form mistress, Miss Hardbroom, standing in the doorway, wrapped in a black dressing gown, with a lantern in her hand. She was a tall, terrifying lady, with a sharp, bony face and black hair scragged back into such a tight knot that her forehead looked quite stretched. "Rather late to be up, isn't it, girls?" she inquired nastily. The girls, who had leapt into each other's arms when the door burst open, drew apart and fixed their eyes on the floor. "Of course we don't want to be included in the presentation tomorrow. We are certainly going about it the right way," Miss Hardbroom continued icily. "Yes, Miss Hardbroom," chorused the girls miserably. Miss Hardbroom glared meaningfully at Mildred's candle and swept into the corridor with Maud's in front of her. Mildred hastily blew out the candle and dived under the bedclothes, but she could not get to sleep. Outside the window she heard the owls hooting, and somewhere in the school a door had been left open and was creaking backward and forward in the wind. To tell you the truth, Mildred was afraid of the dark. But don't tell anyone. I mean, who ever heard of a witch who was scared of the dark? Chapter 2. The presentation took place in the great hall, a huge stone room with rows of wooden benches, a raised platform at one end, and shields and portraits all around the walls. The whole school had assembled, and Miss Cackle had Miss Hardbroom stood behind a table on the platform. On the table was a large wicker basket from which came meows and squeaks. First of all, everyone sang the school song, which went like this: "Onward, ever striving onward, proudly on our brooms we fly, straight and true above the treetops, shadows on the moonlit sky. Never a day will pass before us when we have not tried our best, kept our cauldrons bubbling nicely, cast our spells and charms with zest. Full of joy, we mix our potions, working by each other's side. When our days at school are over, let us think them with pride." It was the usual type of school song, full of pride, joy, and striving. Mildred had never yet mixed a potion with joy, nor flown her broomstick with pride. She was usually too busy trying to keep upright. Anyway, when they had finished droning the last verse, Miss Cackle rang the little silver bell on her table, and the girls marched up in single file to receive their kittens. Mildred was the last of all, and when she reached the table, Miss Cackle pulled out of the basket, not a sleek black kitten like all the others, but a little tabby with white paws and the sort of fur that looked as if it had been out all night in a gale. "We ran out of black ones," explained Miss Cackle with a pleasant grin. Miss Hardbroom smiled too, but nastily. After the ceremony, everyone rushed to see Mildred's kitten. "I think H.B. had a hand in this somewhere," said Maud darkly. H.B. was their nickname for Miss Hardbroom. "I must admit it does look a bit dim, doesn't it?" said Mildred, scratching the tabby's kitten's head. "But I don't really mind. I'll just have to think of another name. I was going to call it Sooty. Let's take them down to the playground and see what they make of the broomstick riding." Almost all the first-year witches were in the yard trying to persuade their puzzled kittens to sit on their broomsticks. Several were already clinging on by their claws, and one kitten belonging to the rather smug young witch named Ethel was sitting bolt upright, cleaning its paws, as if it had been on a broomstick all its life. Riding a broomstick was no easy matter, as I have mentioned before. First, you ordered the stick to hover, and it hovered lengthways above the ground. Then you sat on it, gave it a sharp tap, and away you flew. Once in the air, you could make the stick do almost anything by saying right, left, stop, down a bit, and so on. The difficult part was balancing, for if you leaned a little too far to one side, you could easily overbalance, in which case you'd either fall off or find yourself hanging upside down. And then you would just have to hold on with your skirt over your head until a friend came to rescue. It had taken Mildred several weeks of falling off and crashing before she could ride the broomstick reasonably well, and it looked as though her kitten was going to have the same trouble. When she put it on the end of the stick, it just fell off without even trying to hold on. After many attempts, Mildred picked up her kitten and gave it a shake. "Listen," she said severely, "I think I shall have to call you stupid. You don't even try to hold on. Everyone else is all right. Look at all your friends." The kitten gazed at her sadly and licked her nose with its rough tongue. "Oh, come on," said Mildred, softening her voice. "I'm really not angry with you. Let's try again." She put the kitten back on the broomstick, from which it fell with a thud. Maud was having better luck. Her kitten was hanging on grimly upside down. "Oh, well," laughed Maud, "it's a start." "Mine's useless," said Mildred, sitting on the broomstick for a rest. "Never mind," Maud said. "Think how hard it must be for them to hang on by their claws." An idea flashed into Mildred's head, and she dove into the school, leaving her kitten chasing a leaf along the ground, and the broomstick still patiently hovering. She came out carrying her satchel, which she hooked over the end of her broom, then bundled the kitten into it. The kitten's astounded face peeped out of the bag as Mildred flew delightedly around the yard. "Look, Maud," she called from 10 feet up in the air. "That's cheating," said Maud, looking at the satchel. Mildred flew back and landed on the ground, laughing. "I don't think HB will approve," said Maud doubtfully. "Quite right, Maud," an icy voice behind them said. "Mildred, my dear, possibly it would be even easier, with handlebars and a saddle." Mildred blushed. "I'm sorry, Miss Hardbroom," she muttered. "It doesn't balance very well, my kitten. So I thought, perhaps—" Her voice trailed away under Miss Hardbroom's stony glare, and Mildred unhooked her satchel and turned the bewildered kitten onto the ground. "Girls," Miss Hardbroom clapped her hands, "I would remind you that there is a potion test tomorrow morning. That is all." So saying, she disappeared, literally. "I wish she wouldn't do that," whispered Maud, looking at the place where their form